G'day everyone and welcome to the Australian Herpetoculture podcast. I'm Jason.
My name is Luke.
How you going, buddy?
Yeah, good mate, good. Trying to keep out of trouble.
That's it. Why don't we jump straight on into it, eh?
Yeah, I'm keen.
Guest waiting. Do you want to introduce him or shall I?
Yeah, I'll introduce him. So tonight we're actually being graced by the presence of Mr. Peter Birch from Peter Birch's Colourful Critters and Criticam on YouTube. So Peter's got for
And the
those
OG
who don't,
Aussie podcaster.
yeah,
Yes.
that was just saying just before you jumped on that I'm used to listening to his stuff, not the other way around. So yeah, a little bit funny to be, shoes on the other foot tonight. But yeah, Peter's almost racked up 29,000 subscribers over on YouTube and is one of Australia's larger reptile breeders with a strong focus on Antaresia. So yeah, thanks for jumping on board, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. I appreciate it. You're starting to make me feel like an old man.
You've still got more hair than me, so you know.
Yeah, well, it's the colour sometimes, the colour.
Yeah, I almost need to blank out Jason's screen sometimes because he gets the bit of moonshine coming off the top of his head every now and then.
That's a bit harsh. That's a bit harsh.
He can take it. He can take it.
Got thick skin.
So, Peter, like most people out there in Australian herpetoculture know you and a bit about your background, but for those who don't, do you want to just kind of give everyone a bit of a quick rundown of what got you started in keeping reptiles and how it progressed for you?
Yeah, okay. Well, obviously, like most people, there's a gateway moment in their life, and mine was probably when I was like 5 or 4. I remember being at preschool and playing in a sandpit, and as they pulled back the tarp and threw me in the sandpit, there was a blue tongue. So I remember grabbing the blue tongue and the teacher screaming, it's a snake, it's going to kill you and all this sort of stuff. And they grabbed the lizard and dragged me away and all the rest of it. So that was sort of a gateway moment where you sort of become a little bit more exposed to these things. And I was living in sort of Western New South Wales and, wasn't a coastal freak like I am now. And seeing snakes was a given, it was an everyday event. And obviously, like most people in my age group, we're always taught good snakes are dead snakes. We're always got to fear snakes, and we're always taught to hate these animals. But it's not the case. Like we can appreciate these animals and fall in love with them. Obviously, just like you guys. And I guess as you get older, you get told you can't have certain things. And I mean, I used to go and spend a fair bit of time on my grandfather's farm. He lived out at Mudgee, just outside of Mudgee there, and we used to go and chase and catch all sorts of cool stuff. And the good part about that experience was I was allowed to catch animals, bring them home when we were living in Sydney, keep them, and I'd build new enclosures, I'd keep them alive, I'd feed them and look after them, maintain them, and the next set of school holidays I'd take the animal back, release it, and then I'd go on the hunt again for something different. So that allowed me to fulfill a couple of criteria, being able to chase animals and find them in their natural habitats, try and recreate those habitats, catch animals, learn to work with the animals, and then obviously I had to be responsible enough to bring the animals back and release them.
Yeah.
And then I guess that just grew and grew and grew, and then obviously you get to the age where you no longer have to worry about your parents. You start bringing home all sorts of cool stuff. And these were the days prior to licensing, and then you learn about there's a whole new world out there where you can have a sort of a license system. It used to be a general license prior to all the reptile keeping and amphibian licenses being issued in 97. And I was fortunate enough to have one of those back in the early days, and very fortunate enough to bump shoulders and heads with the likes of people like Bob Whitty, John Montgomery, Peter Krause, John Weigel, all the Jerry Swan, there's a whole plethora of these guys that I was fortunate to be a younger guy bumping shoulders with some of these basically pioneers of the industry. And learning more and more about proper responsibility and keeping of reptiles. And that's, early 90s. And, from there I went on and started a business exhibiting animals and educating people. I did that up until about 2013, from mid-90s to 2013. In my prime of that business, we had 6 people working for us, educating. We had a great variety of animals. We had insects as well as reptiles. We were one of the first people to actually have exotic reptiles as well as a mobile exhibitor. So I was fortunate enough to have boa constrictors and American alligators We also had saltwater crocs, freshwater crocs, all the cool stuff, everyone wanted to see. And we sort of specialised in educating the younger people, trying to get those messages out there, and trying to reprogram people's thoughts, because early childhood understanding is that, around the age 5, 6 years of age, whatever we've learned around that age group is sort of sticks with us for the rest of our life. So those gateway moments that when I was younger, seeing reptiles, chasing, catching, learning, and having the pleasure of catching them and releasing them, I wanted to sort of share that on a wider scale, and that's what we were achieving. Around that 2013, I was working for a business in Sydney, living on the Central Coast, travelling to Sydney, 2 hours either way every day, sort of gobbled up my time, as well as I was pushed into a higher role. So I was doing 60 to 70 hours a week. So that sort of took a toll, and I just couldn't do the education component of it. So I sort of dropped that, but then I came back with a vengeance, and we started doing, like you said, we started looking at podcasting, trying to reach a broader audience in a more manageable time frame. So instead of driving around doing all these birthday parties and education through Sydney, I could do a podcast, and it could go off into the intranets basically, and disappear into wherever, all the cracks, and reach people all over the world. And then obviously through meeting people like Brian Barczyk in 2009 and forming a relationship, that also spawned the creation of Criticam in 2012. And in 2012, it was so primitive. It was just basically me and my young fella, my son, spending a bit of time together, filming, working together, and having a bit better of a father and son relationship, but also being based around animals. And, all those sort of little inklings, little building blocks built up to where I am today and where I continue to move forward. So I guess, and I was fortunate enough along those little trial runs. I did work for universities. I've worked for University of Western Sydney, University of New South Wales, Sydney Uni. I've worked in those fields as technical assistants, basically the animal catcher and handler and all the rest of it, and dealing with vets, scientists, learning so much more and opening myself up to learn so much more, basically not just, having a lizard, put it in a cage, throw crickets at it, and, the lizard's happy. You're trying to learn a bit more building blocks to make sure that we're doing things more ethical, basically, in the long term. And that was the basis of trying to do the educational. I mean, the YouTube stuff is magnificent because it just goes off, and it's amazing how many people that reaches and where it goes to. And the feedback you get from that, is pretty incredible. But the same thing is, if you're strictly educational down the line, then, sometimes it falls on deaf ears. So sometimes it's got to be entertainment, sometimes positive entertainment, sometimes negative entertainment. And, you just got to deal with those repercussions, I guess. But you're trying to reach a broader audience and just get those messages out there as much as possible. And you just want people to appreciate, love wildlife, regardless of what your interest is, really. I could waffle on for days.
Yeah, I guess that's the one handy thing about YouTube as well this day and age is you've got the visual, you've got everything, the whole aspect of it. So you can kind of show bits and pieces as well instead of, podcasts are great if you want to hear about it, but that visual aspect for new keepers or people that have shows a little bit of interest, that visual aspect goes a long way, I reckon.
Most definitely. And everyone learns differently. And I myself, when I'm in cleaning snake cages and scrubbing away, I always have podcasts playing in the background because you could listen to music all day, but the podcast, you're going to learn something. And here I am, I turned 50 this year and I'm still learning. It's opening myself up to learn more and gather more information. And the more information I can gather and put into my collection is going to work, in my benefit, but also the animal's benefit. And hopefully if something that works positive, then we can share that message with everyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
There's many ways to educate, and you've kind of done your fair share of a lot of different methods, and it seems like you've pretty much landed on one that's a little bit. YouTube's kind of one of those funny things because it's kind of good because it's a little bit convenient. You can kind of just pick up a camera and film a little bit here and there when you want to, when something's happening, rather than kind of being locked into a 9 to 5 and and having to be doing all that sort of side, you can still kind of put yourself out there a little bit and get a little bit of education happening with some animals that you've got without having to, kind of force it upon people in a sense. And the people that want to know it are going to come to it.
Yeah, and the thing too is, you can cater it. So you can, like yourself, you can put something together where if someone's into geckos and they're into a specific species, you can sort of concentrate on that and then put it out there, and hopefully, that content is useful, not only for the keeper, but also the kept. And that's the whole idea of it, is trying to make sure that, I mean, we are custodians of captive animals, but the thing is, these animals should be kept in the best quality conditions as possible. I mean, sometimes, tub systems work for some animals and sometimes it doesn't work for others. So we sort of got to constantly got to reevaluate why we're doing the things we're doing. And I guess a good friend of mine, Steve Crawford, down in South Australia, he put forward a question, which is, why are we keeping? Why do you keep animals? So sometimes we've really got to think of why we're doing this. It's not just because we've got the cool stuff or we want something fancy or, I want to be the guy walking down the street with a big giant snake or whatever. But sometimes we've got to really reevaluate why we're keeping these animals. What's in it for us and what's in it for them. Like I said, I could waffle for days.
No, that's great.
It's good.
Perfect.
It gets us thinking too.
That's right. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I was like, that's actually a really good question. That's a question you don't quite hear. Like, that's probably the first time I've actually heard that question. So,
and I think it's important that we ask ourselves.
Myself personally.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes we really got to ask ourselves why.
Yeah. Got the cogs ticking in my head already. I'm going, why am I keeping these animals?
You're now scanning around your collection going, what is this benefit to me or the animal? Why? But I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a good collection. I mean, you see some people have a collection and they specifically work with a certain, like Morelia, or they work with just Taliqua, or they work with just, Nephurus or whatever. They just pick their little pocket and they work with that, and they become, very good at doing and looking after those animals, which is awesome. And I think these days, as I look back on the hobby and see the way it's going, more and more people are sort of pocketing themselves, picking a little niche, and that's their thing. I think the reality is a real reptile keeper can breed just about any reptile if they put their mind to it. And the real key is trying to understand where the animals naturally come from, conditions. You got to look at the diets as well as heating, lighting, UV, the whole lot. There's so much to think about. It's not just, buying a lizard from the pet store, throwing it in the pet store supplied cage and little Johnny's happy. I mean, some of these species of animals can live such long periods of time. And is it a nice way that we keep some of these animals for a long period of time? I guess as I get older, I become a little bit more philosophical too. And I question what I do.
The hobby's changing too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Me and Luke have spoken about that numerous times. Like, you see people now, like, the way they keep is just changed compared to, say, 5-6 years ago, how everyone used to keep, which is good to see, I guess, which probably brings us back to that question that you said before. So
yeah, it's good to see that people evolve for the better.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And like something that I'm struggling with personally at the moment is, I enjoy so many different species and different animals that I can't kind of bear to part with a lot of the stuff that I've got. Not that I want to, but then you take a look at Jason, for example, who's kind of just took a short break and he's getting in, but he's being very reserved about what he wants to keep and how he wants to keep it. And, he's going to be very diligent about, bigger enclosures, better enclosures and all that sort of stuff for a limited amount of species. And yeah, it's just a plethora of different ways how to tackle this beast, I think. And
definitely,
yeah, my brain's still ticking from that question though. That's got me rattled a little bit. I'm going, why am I
it'll take you a while to work out, why. And that's the thing is, I think you always see stuff popping up and you go, oh, I've always wanted that, or I've never had the opportunity to work with those. And, then you go, should I? What am I going to achieve? And then you start asking yourself these questions and you go, okay, I just feel like a kid in a candy store. I want everything. And that's the way most people come into the hobby. They get it's
exactly.
It's like the taste. They get one thing and then they go, oh, this is my first snake and I'm so happy. And you're like, oh, it doesn't stop at one. And they come back and they go, I've got 5 snakes now and I want to get more. And you're like, you'll get to a point where you sort of go, I've got too many.
Yep. Yep. I went through that and then got rid of everything and
some people
myself that I got rid of half the stuff I got rid of, but
yeah, that happens. I mean, you do it at the time for the right reasons, and you've just got to go, you know what, I did it for the right reasons, and just move on.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think about all the stuff that I have sold along the years or given away along the years and stuff like that. And I'm going, man, why did I do that? You know, I'd kill to have that back now, but, you know, it is what it is, and you can't change the past.
No, I mean, I've been fortunate enough. I've had friends along the way that I've been able to, you know, when I've wanted to change my focus, hand things off, and then somewhere down the track I go, geez, I really wished how are those animals going? And they're like, well, I actually bred some babies back, you know, and it's like, oh, cool. You know, that's a bit of the real old school stuff, was just swap and trade rather than monetary value, rather than, as you see more and more these days, people talk about investments. And I mean, that sort of makes my skin crawl a bit, you know. What's the best investment?
Yep.
The best investment is take your money, open the window and throw it out, and then go and see how much money you can find, because that's what it's like with reptiles. Half of it's going to blow away in the wind.
Yep.
You know?
That couldn't be any more true.
If you're lucky, you're going to find at least half your money. You know, if you make the wrong choice,
yeah, that's right.
You're not even going to get that. So,
yeah. Yeah, people see this and they go, oh, you're breeding all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, but you got electricity, you got food, you've got all this other stuff to do. You got to keep enclosures
time
going.
As well.
And
people don't factor in their time as well. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, we all get out of bed and usually go to work for someone else, and there's a value on your time.
That's right.
So why sitting at home working on your own animals is that different? You know, you got to have a value.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's the hard part, I guess. Whereas passion over profit.
Yeah, very true. I have to say though, like, you know, I've always enjoyed having my animals, and I've always enjoyed coming down and seeing them, and, you know, getting the flashlight out at night and seeing what geckos are up or doing what, and, you know, you're always going to get that enjoyment. But after moving up to this new place and having them, you know, only a stone throw from the couch, it has just opened my world. I'm seeing so much more behavior and hanging out in these rooms so much more, probably to my wife's distaste. But, you know, it's one of those things that I can definitely see the benefit that I get from it. It makes me happy. It gives me a reason to kind of do some things in my life and chase some things. And I don't know what I'd do without them. I think I'd be lost.
To me, as a reptile keeper and a reptile lover, it's that passion, whereas you can't imagine life without them, whether it be one year, 5 years, 10 years, or 20, or whatever it is, you know. I mean, everyone's life changes and we sort of move in and out of fads. But if you're a true reptile person, you'll come full circle.
Yeah. I found when I got rid of everything, I was still always on social media just looking at pictures of it. I obviously got all the books. I was reading books still. Like, I basically never, like, the only thing that left was the animals, but not the passion for the animals. That was always still there.
Yep. All the enclosures, you still got like 30 odd exoterras.
Yeah,
you know,
still got a bunch of them too. So
that's a good financial decision, not to get rid of them.
Yeah, that's right.
Fair stack of them are here now.
That's good.
Yeah. So, just on to the next kind of topic, essentially, what does your reptile collection kind of look like these days? Because you're kind of like me, where you've got a little bit of everything, but you do have some strong focuses as well amongst your collection.
Yeah. So obviously my key passion and love and desire is the dirt snakes, the Antaresia. You know, that's been my thing since when I got my first couple of spotted pythons, and back in 93, 94. I got my first couple of spotteds. I bred them, and it was that was it. I was hooked. You know, I was fortunate enough to have a variety of different stuff at that point, and for some reason that just hooked me. I was done and dusted. Doesn't matter what else I bred or had. That was it. You know, there was a period in my life where I was heavily into venomous snakes and had a ton of venomous snakes, But then the spotted pythons came along and it's like, no, these are the guys. This is it, That was my thing. and I've still got those original foundation animals today, and that just, they're probably my pride and joy of the whole collection, regardless of all the other pretty colours and patterns and stuff. And I mean, all that stuff didn't happen until, the first albino Max popped up around 2010, I think it was, or 2008. I think the first one popped up, but you get hets in 2010. But I mean, all the other, platinums and all that other stuff, T plus children's, they were all sort of very hard to come by, very expensive. And we're talking around 2000 is sort of when the boom came in for all that coloured stuff. So I already had a good foundation of what I could do with the spotted pythons. I had quite a few of them. I was able to, consistently breed them. And I mean, in the mid-90s still, it was very difficult to get information about breeding Australian pythons. Like my first Woma pythons were $3,500 each. And, today people try and haggle you, you sell them for $350 and people try and haggle you. And to me, that's just an insult.
That's right.
I don't like haggling. I mean, I don't even go there. But, my main focus is Antaresia, obviously, but I do keep, carpets. I don't have any fancy carpets. The most fancy carpets I own is albinos. I've got olives, blackheads, womas, scrubbies. Because I'm a bit of a sicko, I've got scrubbies. They're quite an intelligent animal. They really interest me on a different level. So for some species, and I hate to offend anyone, but black-headed pythons aren't the smartest tool in the shed, whereas scrub pythons are probably the most intelligent of all the Australian pythons. So I get a little bit out of all these animals just by working with them. So, I've got a lot of, I've got a lot of bits and pieces. I've got skinks, I've got geckos, I've got monitors, I guess. I don't keep any dragons anymore, no agamids anymore. So it's something different.
Yeah, a lot of people have dragons, or at least a dragon or something in their household.
I used to be very heavy into the agamids, sort of around the time I was into the venomous snakes. So I had a lot of things like Tenophorus pictus. I had nettids and mallee dragons and all these things that had biannual life cycles, and so it was very difficult. But once you sort of crack the code, you could maintain your little population and just keep breeding them. And as you breed them, then the older ones die off and you replace them with the younger ones and all the rest of it. So for me, all that sort of stuff, all the agamid stuff was pretty cool. Frill necks, I've bred frillies quite a few times. Hypsiluris, which are no longer Hypsiluris, are they? They're Lophagonus or something.
Lophosaurus, I think.
Oh, yeah, there we are. Lophosaurus.
Yeah.
So, I've managed to work with all this cool stuff. And, it was nice. It was cool. And for me, it was about getting babies, raising babies, producing more babies, and then raising those babies and going, you know what, I'm able to do this and maintain them in a good way. And then, it's like, well, it's really not my focus. I liked working with them, but, I just sort of moved those on, and then the monitors sort of started moving in. So, as they do.
Yeah, I was going to say, they don't usually leave once they start moving in.
No, that's the thing. You get hooked with those things, and it's a different world. It's like a real Jurassic Park.
Oh, yeah. And they still confuse the shit out of you as well.
Because you're working with the Breviochorda, aren't you? The small monitors.
Yeah, I got Breviochorda, Primordius. I got some Gillini. I got some Storoi, Ocriatus. That's quite a few little monitors. They're pretty cool.
Just a quick question: does your inbox get absolutely abused for Gillini at the moment?
I tell you what, I've actually had someone send me messages abusing me because I breed animals and I don't sell them, telling me it's your duty as a person that's breeding these animals to sell them to the general public.
Oh, wow.
I haven't had it that bad, but I have had a few conversations along that line. Someone.
Yeah, I mean, I get spam from America, Germany, Europe, obviously these things don't exist over there. So you can imagine numbers, and you just go, it's even in Australia, you know, like, can I be put on the waiting list? If I had a roll of toilet paper for a waiting list, it wouldn't be long enough. You could go around the world probably 10 times. It's huge, you know. And the thing is, I would rather breed animals and swap them to friends or give them to friends that would also get the same pleasure and, you know, try and build up a sustainable population in captivity rather than, you know, sell them off and make some money.
Who knows where they end up?
Well, that's it. And can you trust the hands they go into? I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I'm very much the same along that line at the moment. You know, there's a few trades that'll hopefully be happening this year between me and a few mates with some certain species and stuff as well. And I like that peace of mind of going, all right, I know this guy's a really competent keeper. And if it drops off, it's not actually something he's done. It's, you know, just been shit luck sort of thing. So, you know, but it's nice to go, okay, cool. I know that's there. If all my stuff goes to crap or whatever, then he'll probably start up his own population.
It's a backup colony just in case someone crashes.
Exactly. I do the exact same thing at work. I get a coral, I chop it up into 10 pieces, I put it in 10 different tanks, and then at least I've got bits all over the shop. So if I need that piece back because it's crashed in another tank or whatever, yeah, it's the exact same.
Yep.
Exact same.
It's the best policy, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's one species that I couldn't even tell you how many people are apparently on this waiting list that I've got at the moment. It just keeps getting longer and longer, and I keep telling them, I'm like, you know, it's hard to get them off me.
I think Gelani is they've always been a hot little monitor, you know. Like, I mean, Gelani and Acanthurus used to be the two main little monitors that we used to sort of get your hands on. But hands down, you know, the Gillans have just got such a character to them. I've got
they do.
I got this. I've got one little Gillans here. Well, he's not little. He's like a thumper. He's a monster.
Fingers?
I call him.
Is that Fingers?
Yeah, I call him Fingers, man. And I tell you what, he just paces the front of the cage back and forth, back and forth. He's like off his head. You know, he's just constantly pacing. He sees me and he just paces. You open the cage and he just grabs you straight on the hand, and then he just holds on for about 3 minutes. And then you go, let's go. And he's like, okay, I'm done. And then he'll just sort of run up and sit on your shoulder. Or sometimes he'll bite me on the back of the neck. But, I mean, he's just off the charts. You know, you put him back in and he's like, oh, okay. And he just runs around and eats his food. And next time you walk in the room, he'll be pacing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Open the cage, he'll do the same thing, straight on your hand, boom. And he just sits there. It's like he's got this fascination. He just loves the fingers.
I think he's starting a few of your videos, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a crazy little fella.
I've seen those ones.
He's a crazy little fella.
He's a big Gillanite too.
Yeah, he's a thumper for a Gillanite. And I mean, he actually crawled up on the back of my neck one day and I sort of hunched back, and then he obviously took the advantage of a big hunch of skin on the back of my neck and bit it. And of course I couldn't straighten out, I couldn't do anything. I was sort of hunched over and I'm sort of leaning down on the floor trying to reach back and grab him without hurting him, and it was funny. The wife walks in and goes, what's going on? Fingers has got me. Fingers has got me. He's trying to kill me. Yeah, he's a funny little bugger.
I copped my first good bite from a Gillanite the other day. I was actually pretty lucky to quickly get the camera onto it. But that was the first one that's actually held on and given it a bit of a tear. And like, for a little tiny monitor, they've got a little bit of jaw pressure behind them.
Yeah, it's good to see.
Yeah. Luckily, I haven't experienced that too much. So, I mean, you've given us a bit of a rundown of your collection as such, but we wanted to kind of touch on, because Jason and I are obviously very into our naturalistic enclosures and that sort of stuff. I do have a few snake racks and stuff here as well, but we wanted to kind of get a bit of an overview of what sort of enclosures that you've got for your animals, because obviously you've got a diverse amount of animals and you know, a diverse amount of situations to keep them in as well. So can you give us a bit of a rundown of certain things that you might prefer versus, you know, enclosures that you do like, whether you like homemade stuff?
Yeah. So, obviously rack systems I find work really well for Antaresia. They're a small, I guess that whole question comes around to knowing the animals, knowing where they come from, what they do, how they live in their natural environments. And not only, you know, just seeing one cross the road and go, okay, well, diamond pythons cross the road, so I've got to build a road in my enclosure. But, spending a bit more time in the bush, actually walking around, tracking and seeing multiple animals doing different things and getting a bit of an idea and a bit of a feel. So through that, I've spent countless hours out in the field looking for Antaresia, going into different environments, looking at the environments as well as looking for animals, but studying the environments, and seeing these things. And, they'll live anywhere from, wet sclerophyll forest right through to rainforests, depending on what it is. Or if you're looking for Stimson's pythons, they could be in dry sclerophyll forest right out to deserts, as well as childrenii. They just all overlap and cross over. And don't get me started about the new revision of the paper. I refuse to believe that Stimsoni doesn't exist, but that's just me being an old school guy. But looking at these animals, typically they're a species that spends a lot of time hiding in cramped areas. So therefore, I find tub systems work for them. They're a tactile animal, so they like to touch things. And I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone else as using butcher's paper or newspaper as a barren substrate. But there's certain times of the year I'll use that. So pre-breeding, egg laying, and then this time of the year they're all getting substrate. So it's all particle substrates again. That stimulates their bodies. So when they move, they can feel particles. Like I said, they're a tactile animal, so they like to touch stuff. They have smallish hide boxes because they like to get into areas and touch everything and feel more comfortable. If you put them in, and I mean, anyone can do this, you can put them in a huge cage and put something in the corner like a water bowl and have a branch. Yeah, they'll spend a bit of time up and down the branch, but then they'll go and hide in the back corner behind the water bowl because they can touch everything and feel comfortable. And deep substrate too works well because they can burrow through it. So, I mean, a lot of people don't take that into consideration, that some of these species like to burrow. Yeah. Even the big carpets burrow under deep leaf litter and substrate. It's an ambush technique. So, we've really got to think twice about how we keep these animals. I use tub systems and have used home-built cages for carpet pythons. And I think that the bigger cages work better for carpets. That's a personal preference.
Yep.
So I think tub systems, I think we're doing an injustice to the animal because carpets aren't as tactile. I mean, they like to hang and move. So, we need to give them the opportunity to move up and down as well as side to side. And I mean, I've got some big olive pythons in their cages are probably as long as the snakes are because I believe like blackheads and olives, look at these huge lungs. You keep them in small, cramped conditions, their lungs can never fully expand, and therefore you're going to end up with, it's not an RI, but it basically end up with like fluids building up inside the lungs, and they can never fully expand or breathe properly, and you could shorten their life period. And, you could, if you're not watching the diet, you could cause high levels of fat, and then that will shorten their life period. So you got to be really cautious about that sort of stuff. So, you just really got to evaluate. I'm trying to get more and more stuff outside. I mean, I live in a rainforest. We get 2.5 meters of rain every year. We've got the coldest, wettest climate on the Central Coast, which could be a good thing, but it's also a bad thing depending on what you need to keep outside. So you've really got to be very cautious about humidity more than the temperature, because moisture causes lots of problems. Skin, fungal diseases, respiratory problems, eye problems, skin problems, the whole works. So somewhere along the line, you've got to have a nice, healthy medium where you can keep stuff outside. I've been keeping stuff outside for a long period of time, but then, winter comes, it sort of comes inside. Those days where we have high rainfall in summer, the humidity just goes through the roof. So you've got to be mindful of that. You've got to move the stuff back inside. So we're in the process of building some, and we've got some prototyping stuff going on, trying to overcome the humidity on outdoor enclosures so I can get more and more stuff outside, get more carpets out in aviaries, and they can get real sunlight. Sunlight is the key to everything. The skinks right through to everything. I mean, some geckos, definitely. Other geckos, probably not. But I mean, at the end of the day, let the animal make the decision. Just give them the UV and let them take the opportunity to either use it or not.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So to answer your question, I use a variety of everything. And some things work better than others. Some things just fit better than others. But really, like I'm changing a lot of the stuff I'm doing here. I'm building bigger enclosures for the carpets, so they'll all get moved into bigger enclosures, basically like a metre by a metre cube, compared to the little V70 trays or whatever you want to call them. Yeah. I just think the animals deserve better. They live so long.
It's an interesting point that you brought up there about, the bigger species such as olives and blackheads and not being able to stretch out, and, the way that their lungs won't actually get to stretch out like that. I've never actually considered that about a snake. Like, I've never kind of thought, like, if you're coiled up for so long, I mean, obviously I'd look at it and go, you look cramped, you look uncomfortable, you deserve more. Yeah. But I never actually specifically thought about the lungs not being able to actually inflate properly because they can't stretch out like that. So that was...
So on the flip side... Yeah, on the flip side too. So back in the earlier days when licensing came in, there was a whole, I don't know if you guys remember the whole Soggy python syndrome. It sounds a little bit sexual, but it's not. And I mean, Glenn Shea from Sydney Uni, really well-known herpetologist, did a lot of blood work, and the conclusion was, they took animals from the wild, drew blood, captive animals that were kept outside, drew blood, captive animals that were kept inside whole time, never seen sunlight, animals that were in and out and all over the place. So there was a whole plethora of data that was collected in blood. And there was no real conclusion why these animals had this soggy python syndrome. But where we were looking at, the effects of UV light on pythons. But I think the real problem was, we're not looking at the way we were keeping the snakes. If snakes are allowed to stretch, move, and climb, that's where they're going to get the strength from. And I mean, anyone that keeps pythons in tubs, like big carpet pythons, you could keep 100 carpet pythons in a tub and have no problem. Or you might open the tub and pull one out that feels a little bit weird in your hands and soft and squishy. Is that because, these animals are designed differently to live in different environments? But do you think if they're kept outdoor or indoors, and I've kept indoor enclosures like aviaries where I've had diamond pythons and they've just climbed up and down and moved all over the place and done whatever they want. And I just think the ability that these strong animals, with these strong bodies and muscular system, need to climb. And that climbing is building the strength in the animal. Whether or not it has access to UV light, which obviously the scientific data says UV light or sunlight made no difference in the calcium levels in the blood. But so there we need to look at, if it's not sunlight, it's got to be the way we're keeping them. That's what I would think.
Yep.
And that's just me going off on a different tangent.
Back to how you were talking it. No, that's all right. It gets us thinking. That's always a good thing to have these conversations. But that goes exactly back to how you're talking about, you're looking at their habitat and where they're coming from, and they're less like Antaresia, which might be a little bit more sedentary and kind of hiding in those small spots, where they're a bit more of like a foraging type predator, where they're actually going out, they're hunting, they're climbing trees, they're hanging down off trees.
Yep.
It's the movement.
You're utilising all your muscles, whereas, if you're cramped up, you're not utilising all your muscles. Same as humans too. If you don't use, if you're sitting in a chair your whole life and you're not getting up and using your arms and your legs are going to become weak. So
you turn into jello.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just think you got to sometimes give the animals the opportunity to show you what they want or what they need, and obviously whether it be like, I know you guys are heavily into your naturalistic enclosures, and that's magnificent. Does that suit everyone? Probably not. Should we do more of it as a reptile keeper, a reptile lover? Definitely. Most of my cages when I first started were all decked out. I mean, you used to go out and you used to catch lizards, and then you look at the environment and go, look at this environment. I might actually grab one of these branches and a couple of these rocks, and I might scrape up some dirt and take that home and set up a cage So it's got familiar sort of stuff. And, even if you wanted to grow plants, you take plants from those areas and try and grow those particular plants. Things like shingleback lizards, like if you go out to Broken Hill, out around those areas, and you watch these animals and just follow them and just watch what they're eating, and their faces are always caked in salt because they're eating the little salt bushes everywhere, because certain times of the year that's all they can find. Heavy, high amounts of salt, but they're sneezing it out and it's all around, caked around their faces, and just watching them and learning. And to me, that's the gold, watching these animals naturalistically doing what they do. And then, if you have the ability and you don't have too many animals, then get some of that naturalistic little. I mean, you got yourself a little window into their life in your lounge room or whatever, and that's the perfect escape.
Yeah. I think that's definitely what I get a kick out of. I think, even before reptiles came around, I was always pretty artistic in one way or another, where I just had to always be doing something with my hands. So this has just given me kind of like a double whammy of an outlet. I'm getting a reptile kick as well as being able to be creative and making enclosures. And it's awesome to be able to go out to areas where these animals are, and even if you don't see the animal, at least you see some environment, you get a bit of inspiration. Right. You can kind of see the areas, and that's definitely been instilled in me the last few years.
I mean, we talk about herpetoculture. It's the captive keeping of animals, basically. I mean, I would really encourage anyone that keeps anything, go out and spend a bit of time in the bush. You don't have to be out trying to catch something or herp all the time, although, we're all wired a little bit differently, aren't we? So, you go out and you just observe. And I mean, and the hard part too, I guess, in my later years is, we're always quick to race out and grab something and get that wanker shot, the perfect picture and all the rest of it. Maybe let's just follow the animal for 10, 15 minutes and watch what it does and see if it notices that you're watching and how it changes its movements or whatever. And we can learn so much just by watching animals. And then, you can catch it and take your wanker shot and let it go or whatever, So it's one of those things, I mean, we're all guilty of doing that.
Yeah.
But it's sometimes just watching and learning is the hardest part.
I still remember maybe about 2 or 3 years ago now, one of my favorite herping encounters that I ever actually came across, and it was actually a large group of us out on this particular night, and we managed to stumble down this little creek bed kind of close to home where I was. And anyway, we stumbled across a bit of a fight between an eastern water dragon and a brown tree snake.
Yeah,
and
look at that.
Obviously, you can imagine who came out on top of this one. But yeah, it was cool to be able to kind of sit down, see the struggle. It was like, one of those David Attenborough shows right in front of your face. We just needed some nice music behind it. And unfortunately, the water dragon kind of succumbed to being envenomated, and we watched the brown tree snake eat the water dragon and then slither off and go into a crack in a wall. And we were like, wow, that was just insane. We spent like half an hour just watching this whole thing play out, and took photos along the way. Didn't touch anything, didn't have to do anything, but just being able to see it happen.
That's gold. I mean, that is just gold watching, and just like you say, that information. And I mean, in the back in the day, people would write a little article about what they've seen, what time it was, and all the rest of it, and all that data. And that's how people used to learn, long before we had the magic of a little computer in our pocket.
Yeah. That was insane. It's it's kind of, I don't know, like I suppose along my kind of herping trajectory, it's kind of rare that you see something like that. But, like even the other night when we were out, we found a bandy, and we're like, oh, this is cool. We kind of watched him for 10, 15 minutes. Bandies are pretty common.
Yep.
I was with a couple of people that was their first bandy, so they were super excited, which got me excited. And then after the bandy kind of took off, the little blind snake just scurried out from underneath a leaf right where the bandy was. He's kind of gone, oh, lucky me, I'm not getting eaten tonight. We're like, oh, geez, okay, that's why the bandy was there. So
yeah, he's sniffing around looking for dinner.
Yeah, that's it. So just kind of to bring us kind of back on our question list here. We just kind of wanted to touch on how you go about keeping such a large collection and keeping it efficient to kind of keep everything clean, everything fed, everything looked after. Because, you know, Jason's obviously got low numbers now, but he's come from reasonably high numbers of geckos and things. I'm nowhere near you. I've got 80 odd critters here, but obviously you're, you know, top tier in that sort of regard. So we want to kind of hear some tips and tricks on how you look after it all.
Yeah, efficiency. So obviously snakes are a little bit low maintenance compared to lizards. But, you know, I do probably have more lizards than most people think. So, you know, it's all about trying to make everything as easy as possible for the keeper, but also maintaining a quality of life for the kept. So, you know, it's always about trial and error. I mean, you just got to, be really on the ball. And I mean, more time these days, I spend so much time working with the animals more than anything else. So, you know, the hours, throwing millions of hours, you know, if you put a time on your, or a price on your hours, I think it'd be way too expensive, because, you know, like most of us, you're just doing it because you just love it and you just want the animals to thrive. Yeah, exactly. And for me, the reward is seeing little faces, you know, those little faces pop out, and that's the coolest part. I mean, with the monitors, you know, live food's one thing, but also, you know, trying to supplement with protein-based, depending on what it is. I mean, things like brevicordia, you know, you got to cut pinkies up. So you make your own mince, basically, and then, you know, you can sit there and feed them legs and tails and bits and pieces, or chop the head into 3 pieces and they'll take that. Right through to, you know, some of the bigger stuff, you just try and rotate whole food items. So try and diversify, not always just giving them rats or quails, but, you know, rats, chickens, quails, and then throwing some mice in there, but also hiding it, sometimes hiding the food, encouraging them to think a little bit more and find and search, rather than just give them a plate and say, here, get this into you. Even the skinks, you know, blue tongues and shinglebacks, they're much the same. Even the Agurnias, you know, they like to search and hunt out food, and they've got higher senses of smell, so they'll go and look and sense and move around and change anything in their cage or hide something in the corner. They'll find it straight away, you know, the Agurnias, they're pretty good. Geckos, same again, same as you guys, you know, try and keep them more naturalistic. I mean, that could be just changing branches. So I live in a rainforest, so I can go throughout and cut some branches, cut them up into chunks, push all new bits and pieces in, pull out the old ones. Yeah, that's quick and easy, and then you can offer them different food items. You know, you can gut load, so that's another technique that I sort of died in the bum basically in the last 10 years, 15 years, is gut loading your insects prior to feeding. People just buy the food from the pet store and go, that must be it. Just keep them alive for 3 or 4 days and feed them, whereas it's nutritional based. You know, if you're not feeding them and they're only eating carrot, what benefit do you think they're really giving to your lizards? You know, that multi-calcium powder, and vitamin powder, you're really relying on that so heavy, rather than trying to make that food item better quality. So yeah, you got to really think about you know, good food, and I guess, you know, I've probably been breeding rodents longer than I've been breeding reptiles, and that's fortunate for me, because as my collection grew, my rodents grew, and it was sort of a hand-in-hand sort of relationship there. And, you know, I could feed and maintain the amount of animals I had based on how many rodents I breed. And I think that's a very good point for breeding reptiles is, and I've said it before, what happens if you're too successful? What happens if everything you do does work out and you do breed a decent size amount of animals? I mean, that could be from one person having a good clutch of carpet python eggs right through to someone breeding, I don't know, 1,000 snakes maybe. What are you going to do when you're too successful? How are you going to adequately house, feed, and maintain them until you let those numbers dwindle? And I mean, not dwindle in a nasty way, dwindle in a nice way where they find new homes. So, yeah, I mean, we use a lot of, I say we, and it's basically me and my wife. do the core of the work here. She shares the passion, probably not as much as me, but she obviously shares a bit of the workload, more with the lizards than with the snakes. And up until probably 2 years ago, my brother is now starting to get a bit more involved. I've turned him from a fish guy and a bird guy into a reptile guy, so he's come around full circle, which is good. I mean, he still likes his fish and his birds, which is really good for the semi-aquatic monitors and stuff like that, which is really good. I can let him take control of all the water conditioning stuff. But yeah, you're just going to make things work. And I mean, we use a lot of they call them deli cups in the US, but basically they're like Chinese containers, whether they be the little sauce containers right through to the the rice containers, all the spherical stuff. And basically we just have plastic. They're like a plastic hide, and we have the deli cups that drop in the top. The animals can then get underneath and use it as a hide as well as their hide box in the cage. And, if the snakes poop in the water bowl, which everyone thinks it's travesty, it's the best day ever, is you just pull that out, toss it, chuck a new one in, fill it up, off you go. And that just makes the whole process of keeping everything clean really easy. You can just pull out put all new ones in, and it's pretty quick and easy. Substrate, particle substrate makes it so much easier as well. Going from butcher's paper through the winter season back into substrate in summer is like a godsend. It feels like nearly every second day you're cleaning cages versus, you just go in there every day and just do your spot cleans. You can top up your substrate, and depending on how heavily you're feeding your animals depends on how much waste is coming out, which will depend on how quickly that bedding will start to smell. Then you dump the whole box and start again, every 3 to 4 weeks, depending on how bad it is. So it's all about trying to make it easier and quicker for me so I can get across all the animals. On a daily thing, I check all the animals. So I've got to see the animals every day. And that's the crazy part. I could go to America for 2 weeks, get back at midnight, and the first thing I do is straight in the reptile room, look at all the animals. Because because I spend so much time with them, you could look at them and you could start, you can understand how they're feeling or what they're doing. If someone's a little bit off or laying a little bit weird, you'll see it straight away, And I think that's something that as your collection grows, you got to remember that whole responsibility still comes back on you as the individual. I've had up to 6 people work for me previously, and, I've had people specifically, their job is to clean and maintain the animals and feed. That's it. And even then, on a daily basis, I would get home from work and, I've paid them to clean cages. I'd go in there straight away and check on all the animals. And if there's, like snakes do, you put a new cage in a clean box and they poop. They poop straight away. And I think that comes back to another thing, that maybe we're keeping them too clean sometimes, and that's they're trying to re-establish, because they're trapped in this little environment, trying to make themselves feel better, so therefore they leave a little bit of a scent trail. So I think the substrate really works well for that, rather than butcher's paper, because butcher's paper is it's great, but it can drive you insane real quickly.
It does have its uses, but
Oh yeah, it does. It has a use-by date real quick. And and I just like I say, I've just got to make sure that it's that visual cue. I've got to check every single animal visually every day, and if they're expecting females, I'll check them 2 to 3 times a day. They must absolutely hate seeing this face. Look at them, every couple of hours. And I mean, that's exactly what they must see. This little face looking there, going, "What's going on?" But if you're not doing that, you're not going to notice that the female, looks like she's trying to lay, but she's having some problems. That egg looks a little bit big towards the vent there. Maybe I need to have a closer look. Maybe I need to, massage her and help her move the eggs a bit. Just make sure the eggs can still move. Do I need to double check? And the egg's too big, it's not going to pass. So let's just see how she goes with that. And all this observation stuff. Reptile keepers really rely on, and I mean, it's not wrong, the internet, they help them out. Unfortunately, they use a lot of Facebook, and the quality of information can't be guided or gauged. I was always taught by the pioneers that we need to rely on so many things that makes us human to notice the animals, and that includes touch. So touching your animals, you can feel. Seeing, obviously, we all see. Hearing doesn't really work, obviously, but obviously the gift of smell. So sometimes opening the cage and going, that smells a little bit funky, or that feces smells a little bit weird. Why is that? What did I feed them? Why is this? Why is that? So there's so many different things. It's not just about opening a cage, throwing in some more butcher's paper, throw the snake back in, and top up the water, and you're good for 2 weeks. There's so much to it, and the more animals you have, the more responsibility it is on the individual to make sure you're doing the right thing for your little friends.
Just to get a little bit sidetracked here, but I'm just curious. You know how you just touched on how you use butcher's paper during the breeding season and during the winter period? Why do you do that and then change back to particle substrates?
Okay, so when I start my cooling process, I usually put butcher's paper in. One, it's basically a big, barren, white or grey surface. You put it in, you put the male in with the female. The female will start to scent trail. So basically she'll start smearing. So she'll lift her tail, she sort of puckers around her vent, and she starts creating pheromones and laying down scent trails. So then she'll it's very artistic sometimes, they leave these little strawberry coloured sort of smears on the paper. And obviously the males are then stimulated by that scent, and then they'll particularly follow the females around. Obviously you can imagine if you put them in a house, like let them go in a house, they would do exactly the same thing. The male would just obviously hone in on that scent trail, and then he would have to follow her on a greater access. Whereas in a smaller cage, obviously, it takes him a very short period of time to find out where the female is. And I just basically, if the female's popping a vent out, you don't want anything to be pulled back inside that could cause a problem somewhere down the track, whether it be particles or any substrate or even old feces. So this time of the year, you put a female and male together, the female will get excited, she'll poop a little bit as well. So then as soon as they mate or copulate, you get in there and you change the paper. And then as soon as you change the paper, she'll probably smear again and poop again. So then you change the paper. And I mean, some people just won't touch them during that period of time. I just get a little bit fussy. I just want to make sure that she's got the best possible reasons not to have issues further down the track. And then obviously, during this period, you see the females ovulate, and then, you just throw in a Hyde Box. I say a Hyde Box, but it's a lay box. You get everything ready and you put in lay boxes so she can start to find where she wants to go and where she wants to be. And depending on the size of your lay boxes too, the females will actually push them around on the butcher's paper to find out where she wants her heat zones. And then, I just leave them be. And then once the eggs hatch, because I do a lot of maternal incubation these days, a lot more. Once the babies start to hatch, I'll go in and take the female out. I'll empty the whole cage out, do a whole deep clean, reload it with particle substrate. I'll wash her down, clean her up, and then make sure that she rehydrates, so you can put her in a small tub for half an hour. And during that half an hour, I'll take the eggs out, I'll clean the eggs up, I'll put them in a box and just put them in the incubator until they all emerge. But it's usually a pretty quick transition. What sort
of substrate are you using in your lay boxes?
In the lay boxes, I've used sphagnum this year. I'll use perlite or vermiculite or sphagnum in the lay boxes. Some of the older days, you'd set it up and the female would lay in the box, and you'd take the female off, and then you just throw a bit of Glad wrap over the top, put the lid on, and chuck it in the incubator the way it is. It's just quick and easy. So therefore, the lay box was the lay box, and that's where the eggs were until they hatched. And then, all the new fancy stuff of suspended methods came in, and so you try a bit of everything to see what works best, not just for number of outcome, but I look at the size of the neonates, and the ease of how those neonates feed, especially for Antaresia. they're pretty painful. I mean, you could have 100 carpet pythons, and you might, first time you feed them, you probably get 80% of them to eat, and then 3 months down the track, you might have 2% that still haven't eaten. But it's very unlikely that you would lose a carpet from not eating in that first 3 months. They usually all feed.
Yeah.
Whereas you do that with Antaresia, that first time you offer them food, you might get 10% to eat. In that 3 months, you're still pulling your hair out or going grey, like me, because I'm only 25. Because they just won't eat. Some of them are just destined not to eat. And, they're on the flip side again. That makes you think of different things. These animals obviously aren't eating because are we feeding them the wrong type of food first up?
Yeah.
Are we not stimulating the right sort of sensory organs? Are we not taking into consideration the types of animals, where they come from, what they would normally eat? And then the third thing I would think of is, we look at mammals and birds and, parents and babies, they get taught, information's passed on through showing or speaking, whether their languages are. And reptiles don't share any of that really maternal information, except for a few species. So is that pre-programmed, so when the babies hatch, they already know that they like a certain type of food because their wild-caught adults used to feed that for the last 50 generations? Who knows?
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's so many weird things you think about, I guess. You could just fall straight down that rabbit hole and just get lost.
It is a massive rabbit hole too. Like I often think about that, and I think I was talking to Matt Somerville not too long ago about it, how, it's not just what you're feeding the animal, but it's what's feeding that animal as well, and so forth and so on, and it's the full food web. Yeah, really. There's all different sorts of minerals and vitamins and stuff that would be coming down the line from all different preys for the whole range of animals. And yeah, when you kind of think about it like that, you're like, yeah, but I'm feeding them crickets that are eating carrot and maybe a bit of dog pellets or something like that, and that's all we're getting, sort of thing. So yeah. It'd definitely be cool to have like a bigger selection of, especially lizard keepers that feed a lot of bugs. It would be cool to be able to have things, easily, like grasshoppers and different types of, like, centipedes or whatever they're out there, just to spice it up. But there's not a lot available. Ants, centipedes, worms. Worms are amazing. You find any of the boidii and the spinipes go absolutely psycho for worms. I actually spent a couple of years working for a couple of professors, and my job was to climb trees catching spinipes. So you start to see a whole new world of how these things live, on a daily basis. And worms just make these things go apeshit. Yeah. I started up a little tiny worm farm just outside this room just for the boids, pretty much.
I've got one as well for pretty much the same reason, and my son likes them, so...
It's awesome. But yeah, I just try and make things easier for me, but also, try and, because of the sheer numbers of animals I work with, that's not their decision, that's my decision. But I've also got to take into consideration that, they need a little bit more of this and more of that. So, there's so many ways we can improve environmental enrichment, like going from full, complete, naturalistic enclosures like you guys, right through to keeping a snake on butcher's paper in a cage and then throwing a branch or a couple of leaves in. That snake's going to go, what the hell is this? Its brain's going to start to function, its tongue's going to start to flicker, it's going to start moving differently because it's something foreign. And I mean, that is just, any little bit is just huge for these animals.
Even throwing shed skins in from other males at breeding season.
Yep.
Just to incite that natural response. And
it saves your other male from getting torn to pieces if you decide to go out and mow the lawn, or maybe, I don't know.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be massive. Like, one thing that I like to do for my female green tree python, because she's usually pretty sluggish, as most greens are, but she's particularly sluggish. Just get a new palm frond, pop it in there. For the next 3 nights, she's just all over it, and all of a sudden she's defecated, so it's just that movement, that inquisitive movement's helped her out. And it doesn't have to be big.
No, could be tiny, and that's the thing. It just stimulates them, and it brings them back to their naturalistic behaviours.
Yeah,
and I think that's pretty important.
Yeah.
Well, you also got to look at it from the aspect of, you know, if we lived the exact same day in and out, we'd go mental, right? So why should the animals have to do the exact same? You can try to spice it up a little bit here and there for them and just provide them that little bit of entertainment.
Yep, that's definitely.
Or enrichment, not entertainment. Well, I suppose it is entertainment in one way or form or
Bit
another.
of both.
Yeah. So just to kind of bring it back around to Antaresia, because obviously that's what you're known for, what kind of was it that really triggered you? Like, I know you kind of mentioned that it, you know, something happened when you had all those venomous snakes, and it did trigger you to want to keep the spotted pythons and breeding those guys. But what is it about them specifically that really made them your focus?
I guess for me it was the fact that during that period of time there wasn't much information about breeding any of the Antaresia, and I guess this is, I mean, Antaresia, they only got the name back in '86. So, I mean, there wasn't really much information about breeding them as such. And for me, you know, that sort of created an interest to trying to find out more. And, you know, obviously everyone knows what a blonde spotted python is, or a blonde mackie. I mean, Bob Whitty is the guy that called them blondes because they were slightly different. They came from Cooktown. They had more yellow in them, and they were very different blotching. And as it all turns out now is that there are different subspecies. So they're maculosus, what are they, peninsulatus, if you want to go off the latest taxonomy. But, you know, like I said, I don't believe in that. I believe that they're different, definitely, because you look at scale counts in the morphology, there's definitely something taxonomically different about them. Genetically, it's showing that there's something different as well. So, you know, you look back to these guys and, you know, you look at how they were doing things and what they were seeing, and then you go out and you look at yourself and start looking and observing and noticing and falling in love with them. And then you see all these natural colour variants. That's what really won me, was what nature had to offer as a natural colour variation. I mean, yes, I'm known to breed some of the cool stuff, but I believe that a lot of people get mixed up when they talk about morphs. They think that all morphs are hybrids, and all hybrids are morphs, whereas it's not true. And I'm that guy that really likes to keep things pure. So, you know, if it's a maculosus, it stays maculosus. I don't want to jump ship to something else just to try and get different colours and patterns in. I think every species has something beautiful to offer, and I just look at those creams and rich browns and yellows and blacks that naturally in these spotted pythons, and it just sort of blossomed from there. I mean, look at Stimson's pythons. Look at the oranges and the maroons and the yellows and the creams, and I just fell in love with the natural colours, and from that, you know, it just grew, I guess. And plus, they got a bit of an attitude for a little snake. They think they're bloody 80 foot long. They're really mongrels, really. I don't know. I mean, if you really wanted a snake for a kid, it's probably one of the snakes I would sort of, you know, they will calm down, but, you know, when you buy a baby snake, it's used to defending itself no matter what it is. It will calm down, but you just got to take your time, and you go through the right processes, and you can have a snake similar to the ones I've got that are 20-odd years old, and you can do anything with them. They're bulletproof because they know that, you know, the snake's got to learn as much as we have to learn, that the animal's body language does certain things. You know, we can trigger them to have different responses, so we've got to be really aware of what we do around the animals. But yeah, I just fell in love with those little things, and I had a good friend, Rico Walder. He came and visited me, and he's well known. Well, used to be well known. He's passed away now. He actually had a brain tumour, which was pretty horrible. As you know, he was a chondro python guy, and I seen his stuff, and every chondro in every colour unbelievably imaginable. And he came and looked at my stuff, and he goes, "Wow!" And I shown him snakes, and I was all excited. And he's like, "Oh yeah." And he's like, "You would have to have the biggest collection of dirt snakes I've ever seen. He goes, he said, you are the dirt snake king. And that's where that's all come from, is Rico, my good buddy Rico called me the dirt snake king, and it's just stuck from there because, I mean, I just saw the love and the passion and all the colours of browns. I mean, there's so many colours of brown that's what I fell in love with. And obviously as we go on, you know, you get all the weird and wonderful coloured stuff. Some of it's polygenic or line bred, right through to recessive sort of stuff, and you can produce all sorts of cool colours and patterns now. But you know, 20 years ago it was unheard of. It was just, you know, you either had a stock standard Brisbane spotted or a blonde Mackie, you know, and the blonde Mackies were what everyone wanted, and everyone wanted the best example.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, yeah, a lot of it gets lost because everyone's in the chase, I guess, like the carpet guys, to breed whatever they can to produce the next cool stuff. I just like producing pure line cool stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with some of the lines that you've got going, though, that you've just like refined over the years. So, because I was never really a big fan of the dirt snake, so to speak, but some of the stuff that you've refined over the years, it's changed my mind on them. So,
I just think it's nice lines of stimmies and stuff that you've done there.
Yeah, I just think it's just sticking to you. I work with my projects, and I work with them well.
Exactly.
I don't want to take someone else's project, you know, and work it. I mean, whenever I've bought coloured stuff in, it's always been from the foundation. So, like when I got marbled children's, I bought stuff from Simon Stone, straight from the original source, because there's two things there. Number one is I'm going straight to the source, so I'm going to get the best quality animals to start with. So therefore, my foundation animals can only be the best to produce better. You know, you can't buy rubbish and expect to produce the best. It just sort of doesn't happen that way. You might get one or two standouts, but not consistently good quality stuff. And the second thing is, you know, you're supporting someone that's already put in the work. So that's how I always looked at it, you know.
Exactly.
So whenever it came to different things popping up, you know, I used to go straight to the guy that bred it first. If I don't get them the first time around, or the second, or the third, or the fourth, I'm happy to wait, but I want to get it from the source, you know. And then they come into my collection, and then I work them, and then I work out how they're working, like the modes of inheritance, because not a lot of people knew the modes of inheritance of anything. They just knew that if you did this and that, then you get some of these, and the rest of it was garbage, you know. So to get consistent outcomes, you need to sort of work out how it works for yourself. And if you're consistently, and, you know, I always say it's like, you know, whenever you're hitting the odds, you know, we always talk about hitting odds when we talk about genetics or morphs. And I mean, genetics was one of those subjects that we all switched our heads off at school because no one really wanted to do any of that. Yeah, it was just boring stuff. But now, you know, every man and his dog is a genetic whiz kid.
Yep.
Based on what YouTube or Facebook has told them. So, you know, you really got to sit down sometimes and work out how things are working. So if that means you've got to get something, put it into something completely unrelated, that first clutch will give you an indication of where you're going. And then when, you know, you breed those back together, whether they be back to each other or back to the original parent, then you get a better indication the second round. And I mean, people get fooled or discouraged or confused, I guess, that if you breed the same parents together this year and the same parents together next year, you're not creating two generations. You only created one, because those babies separated by a year are still related directly. And I think a lot of people get confused by that. And it's sort of weird how some people think, and in their minds they've got it this way. And I mean, I'm probably the same. I've got it this way in my head, but I always reach out to friends all over the world that have much bigger collections, much more, you know, knowledge than I would ever have. And I give them the information. This is what I've done. This is the outcome. What are your suggestions? You know, then next year, this is what I've done. This is what we've come to, the conclusion. I know what I'm thinking, but I put it out there and see what they say. And then, hopefully you're both hitting the same answers. And that's sort of breaking that down and working out how it works. And as soon as you know how things work, then you can consistently produce cool stuff.
Yeah.
The coolest paint jobs.
Yeah, they've definitely got some cool paint jobs going through them, that's for sure now.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I've been watching quite keenly on, I think it's Darren Boswell's stuff. I think he's down in SA, isn't he? He's got some really nice marbles that have almost like a white pinstripe down the back there.
Yep.
There's something pretty funky that's popped up in the last couple of seasons or so. But yeah, it's crazy how quick it's progressing for Antaresia.
Yeah, it is. It's good to see. I mean, that people are finally falling in love with these little feisty little bloody snakes. Like it's just because they now got cool colours. Everyone wants to jump on board, and it's like I love these things back when they were just ugly, dirty brown things. But I just still think the natural colours are cool. Coloured stuff's cool.
100%.
Because it's all pure blood stuff for me, and just seeing the variance is just amazing. And I guess it's back in the earlier days. We always look. You produced a clutch of babies, and you had 10 babies, and one of them would stand out. You'd always have that one that stood out, and you're like, oh, that one's cool. That's slightly different. I'm going to hold that one. I might sell the others.
Yeah.
And then the next year you produce another clutch, and you're like, oh, those two really stand out. They don't look nothing like anything else. So then you'd hold on to them. So what you're doing is you're picking out all the weird, aberrant-looking weirdos, and you're holding them back because they just look weird, And then you start putting them together to see what they produce. And then it wasn't until, I'm trying to think now, I think it was like 2004 or 3, I went, you know what, I've got to keep track of this because I'm getting more of these cool-looking stuff starting to pop up. So I went through and numbered everything, just gave them a random number. And then, if you produce a clutch of babies, your babies would be, I just picked the year now, so it's year 21. And you start 21-01, and they just all have a number. But that number you can correlate back to the sire and dame, and you can start working out. And when you do that, you can actually go back not just to the parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, but you can start getting this whole picture of where the influence is coming from that you're seeing now, and zoning back and going, if that's what I think it is, and I've put that into this as well, then I should see it over here. And if you start seeing it over in 2 different spots, you're like, I think that's something cool,
Yeah.
It's just keeping a track of all your records.
Yeah. Are you writing them down, or have you got them on your computer or something?
Yes. I have stacks. I'm quite analytical. And I mean, what I do is I go through and I write everything down. Every year, every cage gets a breed card. I can tell you how many eggs each particular female has produced since they're sexually mature. I can tell you how many slugs, how many viable eggs. I can tell you all that information. I can tell you their weights, how much weight they put into egg production. And I mean, all that data is just sitting there. And I mean, when I had Justin Jalander and Nick Mutton come to my house, and they stayed at my house for a couple of days, and I showed them my dirt collection because I had the magnificent dirt collection. And they said, this was just after they released the first carpet python book. They said, we're thinking about doing an Antaresia book. And I went, well, I keep a few. And they're like, oh, really? Because I knew Justin a couple of years prior to that, but I didn't really know Nick. And they're like, oh, really? And I went, yeah, come and stay at my place. So they come and stayed at my place before we went up to Darwin for a week. And I took them in, and of course they were here at the right time of the year. I had snakes laying eggs. I said, oh, yeah, check this out. Eggs. And they're like, holy shit, we've never seen this many Antaresia. No one in the world keeps this many. And I went, because, that's all we have here is brown, dirty snakes, or big, dirty brown snakes, carpets. You guys have everything in the world. And they're like, wow, look at the variation, look at the colours, look at the patterns. And they're like, oh, maybe we should get some information for all the data for all the eggs and stuff. And I went, oh, and I pulled out a book and I said, like this, egg sizes, egg diameters, weights of eggs, neonate sizes, hatchies, blah, 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 sexes. And they're like, holy shit, how much of this stuff have you got? And I went, well, I've been keeping this for about 10 years now. And they're like, holy crap. And then on the flip side, it was
the gold mine.
Oh yeah,
they would have been stoked.
All the data was sitting here waiting for someone to open it, and they're like, "Would you be interested?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah! This is my thing. This is what I do. This is my love. My interest is Antaresia," and that's how I got involved with the book. So yeah, I came on board not just as a mate that had one or two snakes. I already had a good collection of locality, as well as some of the newer morphs sort of stuff. And, all that sort of exploded. So 2013, I think we released that book. So all that information was sort of crammed into then. And then since then, everything's changed, It's huge. The weird stuff just keeps coming out of the space, People just keep putting pictures up of all this cool stuff, and you're like, whoa, that is next level.
Yeah.
And it's good to see. I love that.
Are they working on a second one?
We're not at the moment. At the moment, they're working on the second carpet python book, but that's been dragging out for 2 years now. It just every time they rewrite or send things back to each other to re-edit it, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's going to be like a 3,000-page encyclopedia soon. So it's going to be pretty impressive.
Looking forward to that.
It'll be very impressive. Yeah, knowing Justin and Nick how in depth and in detail they are, it's going to be massive.
Yeah, no doubt they'll do a second Antaresia book, though, I think, especially with all the new stuff that's come out recently. So
yeah, with all the new stuff, the double sort of, and all the hybrid sort of weird sort of stuff that's coming out, and all the natural variant stuff that keeps popping up, it's pretty crazy. It has to be chucked in there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and all the polygenic stuff that's coming up too, like the sort of lines that you work on with some of those stimmies are just out of this world. Some of the colours and patterns on those guys.
Freaks phenomenal. Of nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I must have bought this book off you. Yeah. I don't know if that's your scribble, Peter. Where are we here?
It's like a chicken scrawl.
Yeah, kind of. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of handy having this bookshelf right here. I love this book. I've read this back to cover a few times now. But
Thank you.
No, it's a fantastic
I got it
book.
off at the Central Coast Expo a couple of years ago.
Nice.
Yeah. Back in the day when I actually bred a few stimmies.
Nice.
God, those things were pains in the bum to
get feeding.
To breed. Get feeding. They were a pain. I've got a pair of children's pythons. They're the only ones that I kind of keep now. I do have a stimmy kicking around. But the children's pythons, their offspring are just relentless. Like whenever they come out, they're hungry all the time. So I'm pretty lucky with this pair. They just seem to throw some offspring that just want to eat. So,
yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
They're the ones you hang on to.
Yeah. I mean, they must have hatched out, less than a month ago, Jason? And I think
I think so.
A few of them have already had 4 feeds.
Oh, beauty.
So they're, every few days I just shove a pinky in them.
That's it.
They're good. Get some size onto them and get rid of them.
They can be painful.
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky. I've got 2 that are a little bit hit and miss, but even they've had 1 or 2 feeds already now. So
yeah, that's the scariest part, is getting that first feed into them. If you haven't got a feed in them within, at least 4 weeks, it's almost it ain't going to happen unless you intervene. I try and get food in them as quickly as possible.
And that's what my stimmies used to do. I remember I used to take 3 beers down to the garage with me, and I'd sit there at the little workbench underneath the light. I'd sit there just assist feed, and I'm like, man, why am I doing that with these things? Yep. So I ended up getting rid of them because I was just like, nah, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But my own trick that I've kind of learnt with these guys is the first couple of weeks I leave them in the incubator to cook after they hatch out. And just keep them nice and hot, and that seems to get them nice and ravenous. And then once they get that first meal into them, then they seem to be okay to go into another enclosure or something like that. And after that, they're pretty good. Yeah,
with my babies, they have a hot spot of 36 degrees, and everyone freaks out. Yeah. So you got a hot spot of 36 degrees. The front of the tub sits at about 28, but at those temperatures, I tell you what, they get hungry pretty quick.
But I think everyone forgets that how hot the sun is and how hot rocks and road surfaces are as well. So, and they bask on those areas. So they might only bask for a short amount of time, So they're getting that heat and then going off to do their thing.
Yeah. Well, see, that's another thing about going out in the field and taking some gear with you, some temp guns, and actually seeing. I mean, you see diamond pythons cross the road, and you're like, oh, that's cool. And you put your hand on the road, and you're like, whoa, that's a bit warm. And you temp gun it, and it'll be like 29 degrees, and you're like, how is this possible? Air temperature's only 18 degrees. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. But it could be a 16-degree day, and you can temp gun a carpet outside, and it'll be up around 28 degrees, 30 degrees, just body temp.
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, it's suck it up.
Yeah.
That was one thing I did remember you saying. I can't remember where I heard it, but I might have been on one of your podcasts years ago about how you used to run yours really hot. And ever since that's always been in the back of my head. And I'm like, okay, whenever I'm doing these things, I'm just cooking them. And as long as I can get like a low spot of about that 28 mark, then I'm happy. I can cope with that.
It works. And I mean, I breed a few of them, so
yeah,
glutton for punishment there. So
yeah. I figured you're doing something right, so I may as well follow in those footsteps.
Yeah, it works.
Try to do that. So while we're kind of talking about little babies and racks and stuff, something I did want to actually touch on is I remember seeing ages ago you used to keep brevicorder in racks.
Mm.
That was something that I thought that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. I'm like, what, lizards in racks? This just doesn't even seem normal. But
this is weird.
Yeah. Can you just give our listeners a little bit of a rundown about how you put those together and operated those?
Yeah. So basically, I had these. I was keeping brevicorder obviously in 2-foot fish tanks, and you have about 4 inches of sand in there, or 100 mil, because these guys. I mean, you take the rule book for monitors and tear it up and throw it out the window. These guys will climb, but you got to remember they've got short little stumpy legs like a dash hound, basically. These little short stumpy legs, and they're really built for burrowing, and that's where they like to go. And it's the weirdest thing to come in and not find your lizard, and then dig it up and find it at the bottom of your tank. And you just freak out, and it just opens its eyes and sort of wriggles and runs away, and you're like, what the hell just happened? I thought you were dead. But they spend a lot of time underground in the sand, not always building a burrow. They just sort of dig under the sand and just fall asleep wherever they want. You'll come in and they'll be upside down on their backs, sort of basking with their bellies up, just doing all the weirdest sort of things. And they're like a puppy dog, it's just their weird behavior. It's just, you walk in, the dog could be laying upside down and rolling around and doing. These guys do exactly the sort of weird stuff like that. So I thought, I started. Well, I was fortunate enough that I started to produce a few, and I thought, well, how am I going to keep these, and look after them? The first time I kept a couple of babies together, and obviously I had one baby kill another baby, and I thought that's not going to happen again on my watch. So I went through and I'm trying to work out what to do. And then I remembered being in the US, I'd seen a few of the big lizard breeders, how they used to keep things, and there was nothing like that over here. And I didn't want to keep them in any of the rack systems that were currently available, because I couldn't give them the temperatures they required. So they need basking spots of like 55 to 65 degrees basking spot. That's not just complete cage temperature, it's a basking spot. They needed access to UV light because they're a desert-dwelling species. Yes, they do spend a lot of time underground, but they're still going to have the opportunity to get to UV light. I know a lot of people say monitors don't need UV. I don't think that's correct. So, I had to get into these considerations. So I had a rack. I basically flipped the rack upside down. I screwed a whole heap of aluminium sections in. I had these big rat tubs that I was using, and they're probably about 70 centimeters long by about 40 centimeters deep, and they were 20 centimeters high, which worked out really well. So I could put a nice substrate of sand, which they love. I could put a nice big flat water bowl down one end. I could have a rock or anything down the opposite end where they could get up on top, get underneath the dichroic lights, the 12-volt dichroic lights, and really sizzle, really absolutely sizzle. And these guys just absolutely went ape over it. They loved it. And obviously, as time progressed, I put fluorine around the top edge so I could throw roaches in there, because roaches are really a better food, high protein, high everything compared to crickets, So we just built this little rack system, and they'll just we could just slide them in and out. Worked really well, so we could slide them in and out, open them up, spray them, give them a good wet down because today it's going to rain. Fill up the water bowl, throw in the food, and they'd pop out of nowhere and go and hunt and run around and go crazy. And then being a desert species, everyone thinks they don't need access to water. I think that's probably not 100% correct. So I would always offer them water every day. Yeah, it'd be a shallow dish of water because they only got little legs. I didn't want them to drown. So that just meant every day I'm topping up the water. And if you spill a little bit, that's okay because it just moistens the sand around there. They'll burrow underneath and that sand will hold its shape so they can start to build their own little burrow system, which I just started to getting more and more pleasure out of watching them build and move around. So that's how that all happened. I could put all the UV lights, all the heating on the outside. I had fly screens so the bugs couldn't get out, jump out. Nothing could jump in that shouldn't jump in, and flew on around the edge so the roaches couldn't escape. And just pretty straightforward, I thought.
It is something that was very straightforward, but it was just something that I think, and especially in Australia, that's not seen. That's
probably not. No, and I was using. I guess at the time they weren't sort of a big thing, but they were the Exoterra high output UV lights, and I actually you can buy them for fish tanks. They have like the separate ballast that has the double thing for your tubes, and of course I had to make up. Say it.
That's not the Sunray, was it?
I think so. I think Pet Pacific had them. And they used to have the longer ones. They only have the short ones now for the 60 centimetre ones where they had the 1200s. So I just had it so I could have 1200 across 2 tubs. So, in effect, you're using less equipment, but you're getting the same impact. So you get 2 animals on each level, getting everything they need, the light, heat, all the rest of it. And those high output lights, doesn't it make them change the way that they do things? Just turning the UV light on and watching them, you can see they definitely sort of start inflating their bodies a bit more, like they're basking, but there's no actual heat coming off them. But you can see that they're actually basking a little bit. It changes their whole behaviour, that UV.
Yeah.
So,
definitely.
I just like it. It comes out, comes up every morning, goes down every night. Give them the opportunity. If they don't want it, that's their choice, not mine. I just think it's better to give it than not.
Yeah, I was definitely one of those people that thought that I could get away without UV for a long time just by doing dietary supplements and that. And, bred animals, they seemed okay. They did everything they needed to do. And then something just triggered in me and I was just like, nah, why take that option away from them? And it's the same now. My frogs have got it. My geckos have got it.
Yep.
Everything that I've got has UV.
Yep.
Or, just about everything I've got's got UV. That exact same reason. And the amount of times you see animals getting up and holding onto the mesh underneath the UV just to get that little bit closer to it, to really suck it in or whatever, it just becomes obvious. Well, they're using that. They're not using the heat source right now. They're looking for that UV. That's what they're going to. Especially
when they're gravid, they really want that UV when they're gravid. Because you can imagine how much calcium is being depleted from their bones for their egg production. And there it goes back to proper nutrition, Everything goes back to nutrition as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
If we're not nutritionally looking after these animals, how do you expect to breed them or continually to put them under the stresses of breeding and produce good quality eggs, which produces the next generation of good quality animals? If we're not doing that, regardless, even snakes need good levels of calcium. And Peter Krause was the biggest push towards, when your females have laid eggs for that season in that first feed, you get the gel capsules, you fill them up with calcium, you stick it inside the mouse, you feed the snake, boom, try and replenish those calcium levels that have been depleted real quickly.
So you don't hear of that too much anymore either.
No, or even hydration of frozen food items, because the freezing process depletes a lot of the water. And if you're feeding a lot of frozen, I'm lucky because I get to feed a lot of fresh kill stuff. But if you feed a lot of frozen stuff, which I guess people do because I sell a lot of frozen stuff, then, you know, you can imagine if they're sitting it in the freezer for 6 to 8 months and then feeding it off, a lot of that water has been depleted. You could actually cause more issues feeding a frozen food item than not feeding them because, you know, they're trying to theoretically shit a brick, basically. You know, they could rip all their intestines apart trying to pass this. And it's not about making sure water's in the bowl, because it's making sure there's enough moisture in the food items. And I mean, I think a lot of the chondro guys still say about injecting food items before you feed them, like water. But it's just old school technology that we used to do. We used to, anything that was frozen, you just inject it with water, feed it off, boom.
Yeah.
Just helps replenish that naturally lost water content during freezing.
That might have been half the reason why a lot of the older green tree pythons would have regular prolapses too.
Could be.
Yeah.
Couldn't have been, it might not have been a direct correlation to how people were keeping them. You know, it could have been, like you say.
Exactly.
Comes back to nutrition and food.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one thing I still do is I still inject. I'm lucky that not lucky, but my mother-in-law's a diabetic, so every now and then she just gives me a bag of fresh needles, and I'm like, yep, sweet, that'll do the chondros for a while, and I can inject their mice. I don't worry so much about the other species, but you know, depending on how long that mouse or that rat's been in the freezer, it's not a bad idea to chuck, you know, a few mils to 10 mils in there.
Yeah,
doesn't hurt. Or even feed
frosting them in water.
Yeah, well, that's it. Helps. Even just feeding them wet, just so then they've got a little bit of moisture stuck to the fur.
Yeah, it's just particle food. I mean, particle bedding. You know, you can imagine wet-soaked food, putting it in.
Yeah.
You could end up with bigger issues. I mean, with some of these different substrates. That's the reason why it's fresh kill. It's always dry. Always hold it up. They always come up to grab the food. So, or my hands, whichever they want. You know.
Sometimes depending on the animal, like for example, if I was to feed like my olive a large quail or something like that, and it's sopping wet, sometimes I'll just get like a spare plastic lid off a storage container or something and shove it underneath him while he's eating, just to kind of avoid that particle substrate going into him. You can use those sorts of defense mechanisms.
That's it. You don't want a mouthful of gunk that shouldn't be there. I mean, they say, oh, it's natural. They do it in the wild, but I'm sure it's not their choice.
Yeah, that's right. If you can minimise it, you're better off. So
that's it. Avoid an issue before there's an issue.
Exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt that bad to. It's more painful to go through a olive python's mouth with something to scrape out all the crap in there, rather than just avoiding the problem in the beginning.
That's it.
Yeah. So with your Odatria, have you kind of swapped all over to Exoterras now?
No, I've still got a bit of everything. So I've still got some homemade tanks.
Yep.
Just wooden, basically plywood boxes, but branches and basking sites and all the rest of it. So there's a bit of variety all over the place.
You recently kind of put together a bit of a room for was it your Primordius and your Brevis? You kind of swapped a lot of those guys out to the Exoterras, though, didn't you?
Yeah, I just used the shorter ones, which means I could get the UV lights, the high output lights, and give them a greater source of high output. And there again, you just watch them, they'll come out, they'll bask at all sorts of weird times. I have the high outputs not on all the time because they don't spend all their time basking. So I sort of limit how much UV exposure they get, but you definitely can tell that when the UV comes on, they come out. They make, they definitely get out amongst it. So, and I just use this.
And that gives you a little bit more life out of your bulbs too.
Yeah, it just gives you a bit more life because, I mean, you can imagine if a bearded dragon is out on a fence post, he's probably exposed, but he's going to get down on the ground, run over, chase some food, get down in the shade. He's not stuck in a box where he's getting that high output consistently over and over and over and over and over again. I mean,
and the clouds come over and
that's right. I mean, bearded dragons are built. I mean, most agamids are built differently anyway. You cut them up if you're unfortunate enough. You cut them up and they've got a black bag which encapsulates all their organs, so it's protecting their organs from the UV light, which is cancerous. The rest of their body can benefit from it, but none of their organs are all protected. So in this little black bag, So there again, starting to understand the animals and building environments to suit those animals.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's That was my theory anyway. As crazy as it seems.
Nah, definitely not crazy. I think a lot of people are adopting that method too. I think so.
Yeah.
UV on a lot of stuff. But I've done the same with my boys. I don't blare them with UV 8 hours a day. I just have it timed on different times and everything else. So
yeah, and if they learn the cycle of when it's on, then they'll come and use it when it is on, because they get to know when it's there.
Yeah,
they'll make themselves available for it. There's no doubt about that.
Yep. So something that I really wanted to touch on, and one of my favourite enclosures of yours, is your rough scale python enclosure. That's a pretty impressive piece of work there. Can you kind of just give our listeners a little bit of an overview of how you end up putting that together? Because you got a few snakes in there, don't you? There's about half a dozen snakes in there.
Yeah, six roughies. Yep. So basically, the enclosure is 2 meters high, 2.4 wide, but it's only 600 deep. So I was sort of cramped for space. And then what I did is I had a shelf unit to one side, and I sacrificed the top of that and made a Hyde Box. So the Hyde Box is about 600 by 600 by 300 high sort of thing. So it's a decent sized Hyde Box. And I was fortunate enough to find this. They're almost like prehistoric, like myself now, is the universal backdrop. So a whole sheet of backdrop, which was 3 meters wide. So I was able to put it across the back, and it sort of wrapped around the two sides. And then I got some old trees. So basically a couple of trees have been cut down the center. So when you run them through the mill to make fence posts out of them, you get these sections that come off that have got all the texture of the tree, but then they've got a flat section. So it made it perfectly easy to sort of screw them to the sides of the cages. And I wanted it to look like, so you got the big rock background and then these trees inside the cage growing up. And that fulfilled the prophecy right there. And I was lucky in that one of them actually had a big notch out of it, and it lined up with where we put the Hyde Box. So that was the entry. So it goes through the hollow, goes through the back of the tree into the Hyde Box itself. So that is all tucked away, so you can't even see it. Just every now and then you'll see a little snake's head sticking out, or you'll see part of their sort of little coil hanging off the side there, and they're just sitting in that little transition area. And then what we did is I wanted to minimalize or change the way that we use heating, so heat from above from lights. So I put lights in there, but the lights are the Grid Connect ones that you can change color and just make it a little bit more ambient and make it look cool, and you can do it all off your phone. And I know Luke loves the Grid Connect stuff, and I'm a big fan myself. I mean, I use it in quite a lot of the stuff I've got. And so I wanted to mimic a bit more of nature, and I wanted it to be a bit more three-dimensional rather than this background that's just sort of all lumpy. So I found some universal rocks, and they were like a rock that you put on the ground. So basically what I did is I picked it up and I went, you know what? I'm going to put this on the background. I'm going to mark where it sits on the background and recess it in there. But even better than that, I'm going to take it out because it was hollow, flip it upside down, and I put a heat cord inside each one. Wow. So I just Sikaflexed it on the inside. So it's upside down, so that way you got the heat. When you put it in, the heat's sitting on the top of the rock, not on the bottom. It sits on the top. And then we cut a timber ledge because my brother's a carpenter, so I let him do all the hard work because I'm a nice guy like that. So we got power points in the back of these rocks. The rocks can come on and off, and as you take the rock off, you can unplug it out of the power point or plug it back into the power point and put it back on the wall. That power point's connected to a thermostat. It's got the thermocouple coming inside, so we can maintain the temperatures of these two rock ledges. So you've got these two rock ledges that have got their own heat cord operated by one thermostat, and we can control that. And what I noticed is that, roughies like to climb. They love to climb. So we put these big branches in there, and I was lucky I just went out in the back there and just hacked down this gigantic vine and dragged it in, chucked it in the cage, and while it was still green, it was easy to move around, and we fixed it in a couple of key points so it could dry in that condition and hold its shape. And then the animals loved it. They loved it so much in climbing, they went and started hiding in the Hyde Box all the time, which was fine, but the Hyde Box isn't heated. There's no heating in there at all. So then winter came and they kept staying in there, and I thought, this isn't good, so I kicked them out. I blocked that off, and they had to spend more time in the actual cage. And yeah, they did start hiding in different places. There were a couple of ledges where they'd sort of get in and hide amongst those ledges. But what I noticed is down on the bottom of the cage, I had a nice sort of probably 150 mil thick of leaf litter that I put in there. They started getting down amongst the leaf litter, which is something I've seen before with diamond pythons. They sort of get down amongst the leaf litter in the really cold temperatures. And I thought, this is weird because I haven't changed the temperature of the cage. The basking spots are sitting at about 30 degrees. So the only heat they've got now is, at least 5.5 feet off the ground. And these guys are going down to the ground. So I was getting worried about RI and all the rest of it. So then we built a box that we could put on the ground, a Hyde Box. And I used the Zoom Ed heat pads, but the heat pads are a plastic thick heat pad that they use. I've seen it used multiple times in the US. They use them for large monitors, large tortoises. They're actually a tortoise heat pad because they can just take the punishment. And they're weather resistant. They're not waterproof, but they're weather resistant, so they can take the punishment. So instead of just putting it in a Hyde Box and just chucking it in, I thought there's a lot of heat that comes off the top, but also it also radiates from the bottom. So what we did is we put it so it was off the ground, and we just slid it in on an angle. Well, it just slides in. So there's equal room above and below the heat pad. So the animals can either get above or below that heat source. So now they can thermoregulate if they want to get really hot or if they want to get cool. And what I found is they'll actually spend a lot more time underneath with that heat source radiating down than they will on top with the heat source radiating up. So it just changed my whole way of thinking of how these animals really need a heat source now. I always thought, being a nocturnal species, climbing on rocks, they always needed heat from the bottom up. And that's how I built my ledges. But now watching them and watch what they do, they seem to prefer the heat coming from above down. So my next thing is I'm going to have to put a heat source in there, which I didn't want to do, radiating down to see if that changes their whole behavior again and see how they move around. And I would never have guessed that or understood that because for years and years and years I kept them in cages like everyone else, like a 4-foot cage by 2 foot by 2 foot. And I've bred them multiple times. But putting them in this environment, obviously I've seen no mating, no aggression, no nothing. They just sort of dropped to the ground and just didn't move. They will come out when they're hungry, and they'll be like little friggin' rockets when they're hungry. They just come out, they just start a wave of activity. And that's the thing is when it comes to food, I've got to open the cage, and of course they come straight for the door, and you've got to feed that one and try and take one out, put him in a box, feed the next one, take him out, put him in a box. So I separate them and feed them. I try not to leave more than one in the cage, like the whole environment by themselves, feeding, because it'll just cause an absolute nightmare. I mean, if you're lucky enough to get bitten by a big rough-scale python, it changes your life really quickly. They've got really long teeth.
Yep. I've seen them, but I haven't been bitten by a large one, just small ones.
Yeah, I got nailed by one.
When they're hatchlings and you get nailed, you realise that they're big.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I was going to say, those ones that I got off you, I got nailed not long after having them at home by one of those guys, and I think they were yearlings when I had them, and I'm like, yeah, okay, note to self, never get bit by this thing again.
Yeah. I mean, some of my big adults, I can pick them up. They're very docile. You pick them up, and you sort of I can grab the snout with my finger, and I can pull it up, and that's where you just see all the dentation just pop out, and you're like, yeah, I felt that. It's not pretty.
Yeah,
it's not pretty.
Yeah, that threat display is amazing.
It is fantastic. It just the whole head shape changes, and you just know you're in for a bit of grief.
Yep.
Yeah, I've only seen one of mine do it a couple of times, and that was very early on when I kind of first had them at home and had them in a snake rack. And that's they show you that dental work, and you don't want to touch them.
Yep,
it works
definitely.
Yeah. So something else that I just wanted to touch on here was actually your walk-in incubator, because most people don't have walk-in incubators because most people don't have that many eggs.
Yeah.
And that thing definitely puts my tiny little Kamani incubator to shame. So how did you actually go about putting that together? I don't think I've watched any videos recently just to kind of freshen myself up on it, but how are you actually heating that?
That's a trade secret. It's actually the most easiest thing in the world. Everyone overcomplicates building incubators. I've like I said, traveling the world and seeing other people's collections, it sort of makes you realize really quickly that sometimes we overthink everything. It's I mean, Brian Barczyk, he's basically in his basement, he's got this little room in his basement. And this is where it really blows you away. So his shop used to be 15, 20 minutes away from where he lived. So whatever ball pythons he'd produce at home, he'd pack them up, put them in a box, drive them home, put them in the incubator, cook them. When they hatch, pack them up, take them back to the shop, put them in the shop. So the whole theory that you can't move eggs is crazy, because I've seen it multiple times. I've been nursing eggs during the drive home, and the way he had it is very similar to the way I used it. He just basically had a concrete room. He had styrofoam on the walls, and he just basically had an oil heater, just an oil heater in the room, and then that's it, nothing else. My way that I've done it is I've used fridge panels, because I've been working with fridge panels for acoustic as well as thermal properties for many, many years. So access to the materials was so easy. So that's the reason why all my reptile rooms, all my rodent rooms are all built out of fridge panel. Just so much easier product to work with for cleanliness as well as for thermal and acoustic properties. So I had this excess stuff over, and I thought, you know what? I used to have a little incubator there, and I used to be able to get probably 12 clutches in there. And then I had to buy another incubator, which I could keep another 24 clutches in there of just ants, and I'm just like, this isn't working, like I need to do something bigger. So then I just built this room, and the room's probably about 2.5 meters by, I can stand in there so my head doesn't touch the ceiling. So it's about 2 meters high, and it's about 1,200 or 1,500 deep. So it's a decent sized room. It's got racking down the wall and down one side. And what we did in there, and I think I did a video on this actually, about, because I cut a window in so I don't have to always open the door to go in and out, and let temperatures keep fluctuating and make the heating source and everything work its butt off. And the key, I guess, is that if you can maintain a large area at an ambient air temperature, even like reptile rooms, it makes all your other heating devices work less harder, and the opportunity for them to fail a lot more difficult, if that's a thing. Depending on your heating source, if you overcomplicate it or make it work too hard, it'll fail one way or another, whether it be the thermostat or whether it will just stop working, or the worst part is where it just cooks everything. So we built this room, and I'm like, yep, this is cool. And then I went, my heating source, I just bought a fan-forced oil heater, basically. Originally, I was using just a Dyson room heater. Had its own thermostat on it, so you could thermostat on, but I always had that plugged into another thermostat. So if the room overheated, it would cut the power off to the Dyson, which means it wouldn't be able to work. The only problem with the Dyson is if that thermostat turned the Dyson off, then the Dyson would reset and basically start at nothing. It just turns itself off. It wouldn't come back on automatically. So that was a good thing, but it was too technologically advanced, if you know what I mean. It was digital and all the rest of it. Yeah. So its fail-safe system was to switch off. Whereas if you go back to an analog system, which is just an oil heater, same principle. You have a thermostat that controls the temperature, the hottest temperature it can get to in the one spot. So if you reach that critical temperature, you can maintain what you want with that thermostat, which controls the oil heater. And the oil heater takes a little bit longer to turn off, because obviously it holds heat and radiates. So therefore, if you've got to go in and out of the room, it'll maintain the ambient air temperature a little bit longer than most other heating elements. But the other problem is if it gets too hot, because, we get these days where it's 40-something odd degrees, and no matter what you do, the air temperature just gets to 40-odd degrees, and anyone's incubator that's gets those temperatures means you're going to either have some severe, weird-looking creatures come out of there, or they're all just going to fail. So we had an exhaust fan, so when the temperature gets too high, the exhaust fan switches on and draws out from the top of the incubator, so it sucks out the hot air as quickly as possible. But the trade-off is if hot air is going out, you've got to have something coming in. So what we did is down the opposite end of the cage, so you get cross flow. Down low, we put a hole in the wall, and then we put a hole down because my reptile room is on top of my rodents. So then we put a vent pipe down so we can draw the cool air from downstairs up through the bottom of the incubator. It comes through and flushes out the hot air as the fan at the top basically switches on and sucks it out. So it's cross ventilation. You're drawing cool air in and pushing hot air out. You can't push hot air out without bringing something else in. It just doesn't work like that, especially when it's closed. Like if you've got a door open, that's fine. But so closed area, it sort of does that. And then on top of that, I used an Inkbird thermometer. It has 4 different thermometer probes on it, so I could put it on multiple shelves, and I could then keep a visual contact, because they run on a battery, but I bypass the battery and put a lead into it, so it's got full-time power on it, which means it's full-time illuminated, which basically when you look in there, you can see the illuminated screen. You don't need to turn any lights on or annoy anyone. You can just see the temperatures at those 4 different levels in your incubator straight away. Look at your thermostat. It's on. You can double check everything without even going in the room. And then on top of that, I've got one of the actual sim tubs, so the suspended tubs. I've actually got just a dirty old thermometer and a couple of probes and water in it. So that's the actual temperature of the fluid inside the box. So you got air temperature. Yeah. You got, because obviously you heat levels, you get that leveling system. So, it could be 30 degrees here, 30.5, 31, 31 and a half, 32 degrees, so you've got to keep an eye on all those temperatures wherever it's levels, as well as get a better indication, because you've got water in the tubs. The water holds temperature longer than air, so you've got to actually see what the water temperature is. So then I've got heaps of probes and stuff all over the place that just tell me temperatures in all different places, and I can just, either look at that, digital displays, or flick a switch on, which turns the light on, and stand outside and look through the glass window now. And then I can see all the different probes, see all the different temperatures, and I can actually see eggs with heads popping out or whatever without even going in the room and changing the whole dynamics of the room. Because every time you go in and out, you're allowing air exchange, whether it be good or bad, and you can influence incubation times, I guess. So yeah.
It's definitely a pretty phenomenal looking room, as simple as you've made it sound. At the same time, it's just one of those things that a lot of people might not be able to comprehend. And, most people at home, if they are breeding a few things here and there, it might only be a few clutches. But a lot of eggs, you need a lot of space, and multiple incubators, that just doesn't seem feasible.
Yeah, well, I've had that. I've been there. I've done that.
Let that lesson. Well, one last thing I did want to quickly touch on before we do wrap up here was, and it does relate back to incubation, but you did say earlier that you've kind of turned around and you're doing a lot more maternal incubation with your reptiles these days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
I wanted to touch on that a little bit, because I'm doing my first run this year and absolutely packing it every day I look at this snake, because I feel like I'm doing something wrong. But how are you finding your success with that versus your incubation?
Yeah, there again, you got to weigh up each species. But the thing is, you can't just put a snake in a box, throw a lay box in the corner and go, lay in that, incubate the eggs and give me babies. This has taken a few years to be comfortable with. And, I've had to put multiple different size boxes, different substrates, different positionings, and you know, different species too, like carpet pythons, you know, typically don't. They're a little bit different to the Antaresia, you know, like you put a lay box in the front of the box for an Antaresia. She'll go in there, not like it, move around, sit over here, do this, do that. She'll push the box, jump back in, like where it is, and she'll stay there. Carpet pythons, you put a lay box in, they just go in, out, in, out, in, out, and just lay them in the corner anyway. Lay them on the hot spot. So then you've got to start thinking about where they're laying them and why they're laying them. Are they stressed, or is it the temperature they're looking for? So once you start looking at that, females would be laying eggs, and I'd be temp gunning them, going, yep, she's sitting at about 30.5 degrees to 31 degrees. That's the reason why she wants to be in this spot. If she was in the back spot of the box here, then she'd be sitting at 33 degrees, or if she was at the front, she'd be sitting at 28. So she's moved the box from here to there because that's her desired temperature range. But then, of course, you know, you always get those weird spin balls that want to lay their eggs in the water bowl or on top of the hide, or just don't care where they lay them. Just lay them all through the cage, you know, just don't want to touch them, just want to get them out of their body and leave me alone. So you get these weird oddballs that just do that sort of spin you out a little bit and freak you out. So I would obviously always offer as many options as possible. Let them make a decision. Try not to keep, despite what we all think, moisture is the killer to eggs. So I've had better success. This year I used a lot of sphagnum moss again. The problem there is if the female goes out and drinks, crawls through the water and comes in, that sphagnum holds moisture for a long period of time, and that moisture is directly contacted with the eggs. So you will get mold, you will lose eggs, which is a normal thing to happen, but we always freak out because we want 100% success rate. I actually find that I get probably about a 90 to 95% success with the Antaresia maternally incubating. But I think the greatest success is when the little heads pop out and mum's there. And then on top of all that is when the babies emerge and you start weighing babies and looking at babies compared to artificially incubated babies. They're bigger, they're robust, and they typically eat easier. So for me, for that particular species, I think it's awesome. I've actually got a jungle carpet sitting on eggs, and she should be due to, she's probably running a little bit longer than I would expect, but what she's done is she's actually pushed the lay box forward so she can actually get out in the morning and bask on the heated area of the tub. She's actually pushed her lay box forward so she can do that rather than have her eggs on the heat, you know what I mean? And she'll spend a lot more time sort of sitting on the eggs and going through the thermogenesis, which is the shivering, you know, which is really interesting behavior. But
it still freaks me out seeing this green tree python doing that. I kind of imagined it to just be a very small shutter, but it's quite dramatic with her.
Yep.
Yeah.
Have you hit it with the temp gun to see what temperature she's sitting at and all the rest of it?
Yeah, I've actually got a thermometer, hygrometer sitting right next to her.
Beauty.
So it does average anywhere between about, I think it gets down to roughly about 26.5, right up to, sometimes she gets up to 31.
Yep.
Which I find quite surprising because the heat panel that's in her enclosure is only set to 31 degrees and it's on the opposite side of the enclosure from her as well.
Yep.
And the humidity fluctuates. It is just a Reptile 1 hygrometer thing, so take it with a grain of salt, but it does fluctuate from between about 63 to 78% humidity depending on the time of the day.
Yeah. And for me, it's that whole, you look at the shape of the way they sit on the eggs. It's that beehive. I call it a beehive. You know, it's that beehive, and the mothers are so attentive, and they sit there, you know, and the Antaresia is different to, I think, carpets and all the others because, you know, a black-headed python could be sitting there pushing eggs out and you're just sitting there catching them one by one and just taking them straight out. You know, you could be putting them in a lay box. Same with a carpet, you can do that. They sort of go into this sort of transition. With an Antaresia, you know, you you sit there and she's laying an egg and you reach in to grab it and she's straight onto you. Whoosh, like, what the hell? It's like, you shouldn't be doing this, Like, she's straight onto you. You expect her to fall into that trance, but these guys are so alert and so protective. I mean, I had a clutch this afternoon hatching and 2 babies were already out and another half a dozen were hanging out, and I was taking pictures, and as soon as I opened the box, she seen me moving around and she's just flying at me, trying to bite me, bite my face, which is fine. I've been bitten all over the face. And, just trying to get those nice pictures of her sitting on the eggs while those babies are pipping in. For me, that's the gold, that's the cool stuff. And to watch those natural instincts where she knows they're leaving, but she's still protective. She's still going to do her thing. That's pretty cool. And I mean, maternal incubation.
It's as I said, it's something that
should be easy, right?
I've never stressed over eggs so much, and I'm not even doing any of the work.
Yeah. I mean, it's an incredible learning process, and I say to people, you should try it, and everyone's like, oh, it's like, come on, man, life can't be that bad where you can lose a couple of eggs. This is nature. This is what they do naturally.
Yeah.
I mean, I had
that's right.
I had a couple of clutches hatched today, and one of them, a couple of eggs went off, and they're all funky and gross, and the temptation's there to reach in and go, no, that's it, time out, pull them out. And I mean, like I said, 90% of the stuff that I breed, regardless of what genetics it is maternal incubation. And I found with some of the projects, like the albinos actually come out bigger, stronger, more robust animals, which obviously produces better quality animals in the long term. So, when you see these little babies pop out, or not even pop out, and you look at the genetics, sometimes you get tempted to just pull the eggs and just try your luck, but I've just stuck it out, and you get some funky eggs, but that's nature, Yeah. How does mum deal with that? She just sticks it out and does her thing. And I just sat there and watched her, and these little babies come out, and you don't get it. You don't get your 10 eggs. You might get 8 eggs out of that clutch. But then when you open the next box, every single one of those eggs is in pristine condition. You're like, how is that possible? You've been sitting on that for 42 days.
Yeah.
And nothing has changed. And I mean, it's easy to say that, maternal incubation, this many days versus artificial incubation, this many days. Yeah, but that's 2 different snakes, 2 different species or whatever. Well, I've actually taken eggs from, that clutch, put them in the incubator. The rest of them I left with mum. Same thing there and there. So now you can do a direct correlation. Incubator sits at, 31.5 plus or minus half a degree, maybe 1 degree. Mum's temperature, well, she can't get any hotter than, the hottest part of the cage, which is 32 degrees. She sits on the eggs, doesn't move, and yet you can temp gun her and she'll be sitting at 32.8, and you're like, eggs shouldn't be incubated at those temperatures. Everything in your head says that that's death. Or you come back and it's 29.5, or then you temp gun it again, it'll be 31.5, and you're like, so the temperatures are fluctuating. But then here you are, you got clutches that are hatching on mum up to 2 weeks earlier than artificial incubation. I just think, there again, why am I keeping these animals? Because I want to learn more. I want to know more. And, I set them up in situations where I can continue that interest and that thirst for knowledge and information. And is that going to tell us that somewhere down the track that when we incubate eggs in an artificial incubator that maybe we're doing something wrong that affects them long term versus maternal incubation? I don't know. I just know that if I let mum do the work, I can enjoy the process. She can really fulfill her natural place. And, the babies are going to come out bigger and stronger and be less problematic for me and give them a better opportunity to survive. And I think that's huge. That's me anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on that note, you've just completely brought it full circle back to your original question. And it is. I 100% agree. If I wasn't continually fascinated by these things, then maybe that's the reason why I wouldn't keep them.
I think that'd be the point where you'd look at yourself and probably move things on, I reckon.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be interesting. It has to be stimulating for you as well as for them. So,
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap this episode up here. So thanks so much, Peter, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks heaps, mate. That was awesome.
Been, I mean, you're definitely a guy that can talk underwater and for all the right reasons. So, it's definitely given, I think, both of us a lot to think about and, a lot to ponder. And I'm going to look forward to listening to this one back because I like these ones where I don't have to do a lot of talking and I just have to soak it in again the next day.
It's good.
Well, hopefully it stimulates everyone else to actually think, think more. Think more of what we do and why we do things.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree.
Keeping snakes in cages or lizards in cages is cool, but, we all could be learning so much more and giving so much more.
Yep.
Maybe I need to start some of my record keeping up. That sounds like maybe I should be doing that with a few species.
It can take you to another world, trust me. I've got piles and piles, and I mean, here's one here. Look at this, piles and piles of data, and
wow.
Yeah, it drives me insane, but I've got to have it.
No, fair enough. All right, mate, did you want to throw out any sort of information as to where people can follow you or, maybe they can come and buy a snake off your website or some rodents or something like that?
Yeah, sure. So it's Peter at colourfulcritters.com.au is the website. Facebook, obviously. Rodent Brothers is our rodent business. And obviously Crittercam on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and the Twitters. And thank you very much, guys, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, mate, more than welcome. Thank you for coming on.
It was really good.
No, it's been a great episode. All right, guys, so with that said, we're going to say a big thank you to Eric and Owen and the rest of the NPR crew for having us. If you'd like to contact them, it's best to find them at moreliapythonradio.net and email them at info@moreliapythonradio.net. As far as contacting us in our social media platforms, you can email us at australianherpetoculture@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram as well. Make sure to check out our Teespring store for podcast merch. The link is on the Facebook page. To see more of what Jason is doing, make sure to follow him on Facebook and Instagram at The Gecko Effect. For myself, you can find me on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, and Teespring under Beach of Scaly Beasts. We hope to have you back next week for another episode of the Australian Herpetoculture podcast. Good night, guys.
Good night.